Hello and welcome to another episode of Talksicology, brought to you by Recovery Unplugged. Here at Talksicology, we talk all things addiction, recovery, and mental health. Tonight's guest, legendary musician Chris Gates. I'm your co-host, Jason Cabello, and as always, your host and mine, Joseph Gorordo.
Welcome to talk. I'm gonna stop. That was gonna take
Keep
way
going,
too
man.
long.
That's
Too many syllables.
that's good stuff.
Oh man, Jason, I haven't seen you forever.
I know. I missed you, Joseph.
Oh man, yeah. To
like
our viewers out there, welcome to Talksicology. If you haven't been keeping up, last week Jason was solo. The week before that, I was solo. Were you solo the week before that?
I think so. It's been a while since we've been on together, so
yeah,
it's good to be here with you. It's still my favorite part of the week, but now it's like reunited and it feels so good.
So
anyway,
good.
Yeah, but no, it does, man. What have you been up to?
What's
new?
Wrapping up the baseball season with Jackson. We got the tournament this weekend. He also has musical theater production this weekend doing The Little Mermaid.
Wow, is that difference between musical theater?
No. That's his musical theater production is The Little Mermaid.
No, I know, but theater is a very Texas thing. Theater was yeah.
You're saying the same word twice. I don't know what you're saying. Right.
Theater.
What do you hold on. What do you call that nut that they make pralines out of? Bake it in a pie.
Is that a pecan?
Oh Jesus, this guy. Pecan. It's a pecan.
I've only been in Texas like 2.5 years. I'm learning.
Man.
Anyway, I have some news that I didn't go over with you beforehand, and it's definitely it's with the heavy heart, and tonight is going to be my last night shooting Talksicology with this beautiful background. I'm moving, and the wallpaper's not coming with this whole like Disney haunted house aesthetic is not going to be coming with me.
You're not bringing the wallpaper?
No, I'm not going to bring the wallpaper.
How much was that wallpaper?
It was. You'll have to ask Gabby, who was my significant other, who was behind the scenes Greg predecessor. She has an eye for style, and that's why this works. But she picked out the wallpaper. But she is definitely helping me set up the studio, so it will look cool. But I was going to do a little like musical montage of just the background from like different episodes that we had. But for the people who just listen, I thought that would be a little bit boring. But yeah, this is end of an era here. So
that was a bad investment, that wallpaper. That was a bad investment.
I think it gave us 2.5 years of solid service.
Yeah,
and it got a lot of airtime.
It did. It was in a lot of things. But you know what? We haven't done. People have not tuned into the show today to hear you and me banter. Although that is a big draw, right? For our new people, we got to let them know, right? Talksicology is a weekly podcast. We live stream on Facebook. Like, follow, subscribe. We talk about mental health, addiction, recovery, and all things related in what I would call a informed yet approachable way, right? Yeah.
Huh. Yeah. Okay. I'm all for that. I'll co-sign that.
Oh man. So actually, have you found? I enjoy moving. And I find that it's a great way to find little treasures that you forgot you had. Pictures and things like that. Have you had any of that experience yet?
I have ADHD really bad. So me like picking up a box and like going through it means I'm going to be there for at least 2 hours. and looking at every little trinket. And I'm a collector of like little things, zines, old skateboard stuff. So I'll find like an old like skateboard wheel or something and be like, oh man, and just start reminiscing back and then be like, this reminds
This
me of this
wheel.
one book. And then I'll have to go look at the book and then it just sends me into a spiral. And
Yeah.
I can't take medication for it. So,
So like,
yeah, that's why that.
yeah, Gabby comes home and you're like taking a bath in the middle of the day, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And you're like, "Can't you see
Yeah,
I'm dusting the blinds?" Like,
I have all my little, yeah, pretty much. I have all of my little action figures set up, and I'm playing with them.
oh Lord. I did want to talk about. So in Austin, we have a lot of traditions in Austin. There's a lot of yearly activities, and one of the big ones. It's always a topic of discussion throughout the city of Austin. Is did you see the ACL Fest lineup? And I asked you that before the show, and you said you had not seen the lineup. So this is another
not
step
seen the
towards
lineup.
being a true Texan. Let's see the lineup. That's our lineup this year, Jason. Now I'm just gonna be quiet, and I'm gonna let you reflect out loud on your first thought.
A lot of good stuff in the smaller print. I'm not so sure about the large print stuff if I'm really too interested in seeing much of that. But yeah, Wet Leg, Youngblood. Let's see, Diplo. Oh man, there's a lot of cool stuff. I've never been to an Austin City Limit, so we were talking back and forth earlier about the older you get, the less significant the fine print is. I can't even read the fine print at this point anymore. So I'd say like the top to middle top is some stuff that I'd really like to see.
So I'll say two things on the headliners, right? One, I'm hyped to see Paramore because when Paramore first came out, I was too cool for any kind of rock music that was that poppy. And you know what? I'm a convert. But the other one, honestly, man, Lil Nas X, if you really take the time and look at what he's doing, he is like a force of rebellion.
Right. I could agree with that. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
And Red Hot Chili Peppers, I got to see Red Hot Chili Peppers in what I would call their prime back in like the late 80s when
the Sock Day.
Yeah, and a little bit before that, and so I'm not sure I'm into much of their new stuff, but they were great, and they were, and I'm sure we're gonna get into this stuff with our guest today, Chris, about like old skateboarding stuff. But they were in this movie called Thrashin', which was an '80s skateboard movie, and they were in there, and that was one of my first introductions to like skate culture, and I was just like, okay, well these guys are great. So,
Greg saw Paramore in 2006. Oh man!
Wow.
See, Greg is so young. I was gonna say like that must have been before Greg got sober, but Greg is so young that might have been before he started getting high. Frankly,
shit. Yeah, dude, that's pretty good. Yeah, 2006. I was in my prime. I was like, I was still kind of holding it together a little bit in 2006.
Yeah. No, 2006 is getting towards the end of it for me. But real quick, Greg, I don't know if you were able to pull up the Riot Fest lineup. I want to compare and contrast here, Jason. If you could pick one of these two festivals to go to. Riot Fest is a yearly festival in Chicago.
Yeah.
Now look at that lineup. Look at that lineup.
Okay. I could I'll have to say right off the top, I think the ACL lineup would be more up my alley.
Really?
Yeah, a little bit. I can't see the fine print on here. The screen's kind of far away. But,
I'm going to help you out a little bit. My Chemical Romance. Now, you might not see it, but on Misfits it says the original Misfits, which I understand to mean that Glenn Danzig will be singing. Nine Inch Nails, Alkaline Trio, Portugal the Man, Bleachers, Placebo. If you were depressed in the 90s, you love Placebo. Yellow Card. Yes. I see. Yes.
I'd be into seeing the yes. We're great.
Oh, and Sadie's in the
Sunny
comments
Day Real Estate. Okay.
Out.
Sunny Day Real Estate kind of changes it a little bit, so that might I don't know. That would have to be I would have to get a third party to help me decide. I would have to rock paper scissors it. They're both pretty good.
Okay. Well, speaking of music, let's get things moving so that we can get to our guest. Greg, let's go to the spinny wheel of songs just to get things moving in the right direction.
My favorite intro.
There once was a wheel, it was a special wheel, it was a magical wheel, it was the best damn wheel, it's the spinny wheel of songs. Da-da-da-da.
Phenomenal.
My crowning glory.
Yeah.
It's my best work to date.
Weren't you nominated for like a Peabody Award for that that short film?
No, it was a body.
Peabody.
Okay. Body. Where's the wheel, Greg? Greg, where's the wheel?
He wanted to hear us banter a little bit because it's been so long. He missed it.
She's just soaking it all in. All right, here we go to our audio-only listeners. There's now a wheel on the screen that Greg is going to spin for us because he's like Vanna White over here. Let's see. Today we're talking about a song that makes you cry.
Oh,
Ooh,
okay.
Okay.
All right.
You want to go first? You ready?
Yeah, I could start with just one, and it's just... So I've always been into sad songs, even when I was like a little kid and I had nothing to be sad about. Like I loved like Phil Collins, Against All Odds. When I was maybe 9, 10 years old, and I remember just listening to that and just being like the emotions that came over me. It was the first time I like cried to a song, so that is my first pick.
Ooh, I'm gonna go. My first pick. Are we taking turns, or what are we doing?
Yeah. Let's go back and let's ping pong it.
Right. I'm going to go with the live version of Jane Says by Jane's Addiction. There's a live recording where they go real heavy on the xylophone solo that, early on it was like an addiction thing, right? Like I'm going to quit tomorrow would always get to me, but like it can apply to so many other things as life kind of continues. That'll get me right in the feels every time.
Yeah. Okay. There is a song, and I don't have to say it. I'm not a huge fan of the band itself, but there is a song These Days by Black Keys. Mm-hmm. And I remember trying to get clean, and I had like a little iPod shuffle, and that song was on there. And there's this line that says, talking about changing your ways, but what's worse if I could, like basically saying like, I'd love to change my ways, but if I had the chance, would I, is the sentiment of it. And I just remember just like fucking bawling just because I was in so much pain and like didn't know if I wanted to change. So that song, Black Keys, These Days.
All right. I'm going to go with Follow You Into the Dark by Death Cab for Cutie. But it's not like a sad cry. It's like I mean, it makes me think about my wife, and it's like a gratitude cry. I don't know, but Follow You Into the Dark, Death Cab for Cutie, big time.
Okay, and my last one, it's always on my whatever this thing spins on and lands on. It's gonna be Fond Farewell by Elliott Smith, because that song. I got really into it lyrically when I was still using, and then it had a lot to do with my recovery. So when he's talking about like vomiting in the kitchen sink and that song still, just like, anytime it comes on, it gives me chills. I have the tattoo of it right there. It's that's a banger for me.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna do two more because I can't decide. Maps by the Yeah Yeah Yeahs.
Good one.
That's a song that the first time I heard it, I cried. Just the emotion that early 2000 New York scene was my jam. But also, Cats in the Cradle.
Does that change more now that you have kids?
Because
that is a very father and child song.
Yeah.
Or was it always?
It always was. Yeah.
Okay.
I got some daddy stuff.
All right. Well, we'll tune in next week on Talksicology when we talk about Joseph's daddy issues.
Look, Sadie's vibing with all my stuff. She's got stuff too.
Right on.
Oh man, ooh, Zion by Lauryn Hill, great call. All right, we've kept our guest waiting long enough, you guys. Today we have an Austin music legend. This is a man that I read about in books before I met him. His band, the Big Boys, they're featured in the book Get in the Van, which was an amazing early DIY book. Anyway, without further ado, Mr. Chris Gates.
Hey, you guys.
Ooh, and really, man, we could. Chris's bio could be 30 seconds long, or it could be 30 minutes long. You know, Austin recovery legend, sponsor to many, savior to many. Like I hear when Chris Gates' name comes up, so many people just immediately jump to gratitude and say things like, "That man saved my life."
I'm grateful that I'm unaware of that mostly.
Yeah, we got to keep Chris's ego in check a little bit.
Healthier for me to be unaware of that.
But Chris, welcome to the show. Thank you for doing this. I got to tell y'all. So I saw Chris last week at an industry thing, right, like a treatment rehab people thing, and we were talking, and there's hundreds of people milling about, and we're having like a pretty wild conversation. And it's like, well, let's just pick it up next week. And I was thinking about it on Monday, and I was like, you know what? We're going to pick it up on the show.
Yeah. We've talked about it. When we first started, your name was on the short list of the first guests that we wanted to have on.
Any excuse to talk, really.
And
the funny part is, before I got start with, I'm the quiet one in my family, and before I got sober, I never talked. Like, I was just angry and sullen, and I never really talked. I was never funny. I never talked. And then I got sober, and I got fascinated by this trick that the steps taught me about living, and I'm excited about it all the time. So,
yeah. So Chris, to our viewers who don't know kind of who you are, let's just start off by getting into kind of the short and fast version of your story. Where'd you come from, what happened, how'd you get fucked up, and then how'd you get better?
Yeah, well, I was born in Austin, and I come from a very normal family. Nobody drinks, nobody uses, nothing funny nobody ever sat me down funny on a toilet or touched me in a weird way or anything. Very normal upbringing. Super happy as a kid until the first day of first grade, and then I had to go to school with all those other kids, and they made me super uncomfortable. And so I started eating. Food was my first drug of choice. And same kids, 6 years, never really developed any deep friendships. This is an ongoing theme in my life. I also discovered music, like literally at 7 years old. In 67, 68, 69, I saw the Rolling Stones and Ed Sullivan, and knew at that moment I wanted to play guitar in a rock band for the rest of my life.
What did they play? What did they play on Ed Sullivan?
I have no idea. It was just like I stumbled into this thing. It was like, oh my God, what? Oh my God, and like it was just this moment. And it may not even have been the Rolling Stones. That's how I remember it. I've done a lot of drugs, but I grew up right by the UT campus, and so I started buying records at garage sales. Anything, doesn't matter what, anything. If it's on TV and there's music, I'm watching it. So, Sonny and Cher variety show, don't care, watching it. And went to a middle school where nobody from my grade school went. Everybody feels weird in middle school. I was weird in middle school. I had long hair, and I was listening to Black Sabbath on a tape deck in 1972, and going to concerts by myself where they smoked a lot of weed, and they were passing joints around. And after a while, these seemed like nice people. So I started smoking pot, which was, made it being me so much easier. And it was real easy to find. So I started smoking a lot of weed in middle school and weed and alcohol in high school. But my addiction didn't really it was still really fun. I wasn't one of those people who was like in deep by high school. That wasn't my story, And I discovered skateboarding. I met the guy who became the singer in the Big Boys years later when I was in 8th grade. He lived next door to this kid who I met on the school bus. And he had just come back from California with the first urethane wheel skateboard in Texas, probably. And he was out riding on the street, and my brother and I and my buddy were looking at him going like, dude, that's cool. Let's find skateboards. And so we started skateboarding. That would have been about 74.
So this was before polyurethane wheels and like good trucks and stuff.
They had
right?
just come out. He came back with a set of Road Rider 4 urethane wheels on a Logan Earth Ski that he bought out there in California, big oak board. Our first boards were clay wheel because that was all we could find. And then shortly thereafter, somebody in Austin had a skateboard and we got it. And so we all started skating, and that's where I met the guy who became the guitar player in the Big Boys, was also through skating. And that was my little subset of weirdos and amongst all the rest.
Is that Tim Kerr?
Yeah. Tim Kerr and Biscuit. You know, we all met I met Biscuit when I was 13. I met Tim when I was probably 15. You know, they were 6 and 13 years older than me, and they had cars so they could drive us to the ditch. So you know,
that's all you needed back then.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And graduated high school, got in my first band. That was the Big Boys. We started playing. Things started going well. We made some records. We started touring. It was really fun. Nobody knew what to make of us because we played with bands like Black Flag and people like that, but we didn't sound like that at all. And nobody, until Thrasher wrote some articles about us, like literally the first tour we went on, we sent a letter. Tim and I sent a letter to Thrasher magazine. It had just come out. And we wrote a letter to him going, hey, we're this punk band from Texas. We're coming to California on tour. We'd love to go skating. We'd love to meet up. And like we pulled into the place we were staying, and Mofo and Tony Alva were waiting for us.
Oh my God.
They just climbed in our van and rode around with us for the whole tour and took us skating everywhere we could think of. And it was just mind blowing.
So were you guys compatriots of Butthole Surfers, or were y'all before Butthole?
No, we were before. They played their first show in Austin, and I think they're only their second show in public opening for us.
Shut up.
So I just have to say, hyper aware, big fan since I've been, since I started skating probably in like 86, 87, and was hyper aware of just the logo, the Big Boys logo. I saw that and it spoke to me so much because it was the Anarchy sign, skateboard, and I have a Tim Kerr original painting right back there in the back if you can't see it. But so I came from, I grew up in Miami in South Florida. And I could imagine that Texas was much the same in that, I was listening to some bands, some punk bands, but I didn't feel like it represented where I was from, because it was either like bands from Boston, bands from LA. So I just think it's so cool that when you talk about like Texas punk rock, like they talk about you guys were it. Like it was you guys, We
were the first ones. We were really the first band to leave Austin. There were a whole generation of bands before us who were super encouraging. And we wouldn't have been able to keep going without that generation of bands that a lot of people haven't heard that much about. But we were the first band to start touring. And the thing about back then in the punk scene is that there was so much geographic isolation that you get these fanzines and you get these few records in here and there, but you had no real idea what was going on anywhere else. And the punk scene in Austin was started by a bunch of guys from the film school and the drama school and the architecture school. And they were all 5 years older than me. And they were more hyper-focused on what was happening in New York in the mid-'70s. So it wasn't like Sex Pistols, or it was television and the Ramones and the Stooges. And look at the bands that scene produced. It was Big Boys. It was the Dicks. It was the Butthole Surfers, Scratch Acid, the Offenders. None of those bands are NBC. None of those bands are anything like each other. And we all played together, and we existed in this little, like the whole thing about Austin was like it was what we thought punk rock was, which was just do your own thing and we'll be supportive.
That reminds me, you talk about that, and that reminds me a lot of like the scene in Laredo, Texas when I was a kid. There was this pizza joint called Sal's, and there was two sides to it. And one side was guys in cowboy boots and Wranglers playing pool. And the other side was weird high school kids. And the scene was so small that it was like death metal band, thrash metal band, punk rock band, goth band, pop punk bands. Like we all played together.
You had to. There wasn't enough of us to fight amongst each other, at least not in the beginning, Right. And there came a point in time, like punk rock is supposed to be about anarchy. But by 1982, it became possible to do punk wrong, and it's, scenes don't attract people who have the qualities the scene espouses. They attract people who wish they had those qualities. And it's supposed to be about anarchy, and it attracted this uptight group of morons, and so like suddenly the hardcore bands hated the weird arty bands, and and everybody's being like, I don't have the patience for that.
Became very divisive for a long time, and it was
so.
just
Chris, let me ask you. So I'm a big fan of like the ism before the alcohol, and you mentioned food was kind of your first thing, and then you got into pot, and pot kind of made being you easier. Did being a part of the scene in Austin, did that fix something for you? Like
a little bit. Like one of the things about me that is still true, even 23 years sober, is that even on a good day, and by good day, I don't mean on a day going the way I want to. I mean on a day when I'm as spiritually connected as I can be. Even on that day, if I'm in a room around other people, I don't feel like I'm belong. That's just how I'm wired, And so finding the punk scene, like finding the skate scene originally, because there was maybe 30 of us in the whole city who were skateboarding, and they were my people. And then finding the punk scene was like finding the boho island of misfit toys. It was like, and a lot of the people were really brilliant and really creative, because you had to be pretty bright and creative to even find that music in 79 and 80. But there was also a lot of people who struggled into addiction at points along the line, and a lot of them didn't make it. But yeah, finding that community was super helpful. And also around that time, I had a breakdown and got on antidepressants, which was also super helpful until I aged out of my parents' insurance, and I couldn't afford them anymore. And then I discovered meth instead, which was also awesome.
So let's get into that. So the big boys start to, you all form the big boys. You start to do some touring here, and I believe internationally too, right? Y'all made it to Europe.
No, we never left the States. It was, mostly we only went to the West Coast because, that's where we knew the most people. We did a couple of East Coast runs, but it was like everybody helping everybody. It's like, if you're coming through Texas, we're going to book all your shows kind of for you in Austin and Dallas and Houston and San Antonio. And then we're going to play all those shows with you. And then when we go to DC, we stay at Discord and we play with Minor Threat. And when we go to New York, we stayed at Glenn Danzig's house and play with the Misfits. And we go to Ohio or Detroit, we're playing with the Necros and staying at their house and staying at Corey's house. And we're, that's the way it worked. We all stayed with each other and we had to support each other because there was no money.
Yeah.
It was barely enough to feed us and get us gas to the next city.
So Jason just had a moment when you mentioned Discord and playing with Minor Threat. I don't know if you saw him. He freaked out for a moment there.
Yeah, I just and it's it's weird because we've talked before, Chris, and my parents were in the music business, and I've met all kinds of people, but I don't think I've fanboyed out this hard in a long time, man. It's just like you're and talking about like the skate community. Like the skate community is still like, when I moved out here, I didn't know many people. I knew some people from Recovery Unplugged, and I'd go to the skate shop and met some people, and then just skating around, and like I feel like I'm part of such a big community out here now. Especially like a lot of people in recovery too, and it's just like still has that thing, because I mean, even though it's gotten a lot more popular and it's in the fucking Olympics now and all this stuff, there's still that like kind of like we're sort of outsiders, but we all can get together and do this thing. And you have people from all different walks of life who are into all different things, but when you come together as a community like that, there's some magic there.
In Austin and Texas, I don't know how it is in other places, but with skateboarding here, there were always people hanging around the edges and enjoying it and doing whatever. But there was always the community at the core that were, like you said, we may not be into the same kind of music or the same kind of whatever, but when we're together, we're just skaters. And that's all we're doing, And I still feel an affinity for that community, even though I had to stop skating because I fell in a pool in '83 and couldn't move any of the fingers on my left hand for 2 months. And I said, if I broke my left wrist again, I'd never play guitar again. So I had to stop skating. I don't fall all that much, but when I fall, I break stuff because I'm a big boy. So,
right.
So Chris, when did things start to go off the rails? What started to happen to get you to the point where you're like, maybe this isn't working for me anymore?
Well, and the short version of the progression is, by 21, I'm drinking so much, I'm starting to pass out places. And rather than pulling back on the drinking, I just make friends with the guys in the scene who are doing meth because they've always been there and I know them now and they seem like nice people. And within a year of starting to do meth, I'm now dealing it, and I've got a partner who's a cook out of Dallas, and he's bringing weight down, and I'm selling it so I can have it free. And Big Boy's in, Poison 13 comes in. We're drinking and doing meth all the time, well, some of us. And then when that band ends, I'm in LA after the end of a Poison 13 tour, and I decided to stay an extra week because I don't have any reason to go back to Texas. And there's a girl who let me stay at her house, and I went to a party and saw one of the very earliest Guns N' Roses shows in a basement of an apartment complex in Hollywood, and went like, dude, I want to be in a rock band. And so I packed up my stuff and moved to LA. And within a month, within a few months of getting there, I met this beautiful little goth girl who was dealing the best crystal meth I'd ever seen.
Oh, those goth girls.
So I moved in with her, and but eventually the wheels came off, and the guy we were working with got busted, and by about 89, the city had become overrun with heroin. Everybody was strung out on heroin. And, I'd been awake for a long time, so getting some rest felt like a good idea. And once I started doing heroin, like I always tell people, like in my story, I always say that like I'm 23 years sober, and I still don't believe in anything that could be classified as a deity. But my deal with the universe back then was I don't pray for parking spaces. And what that meant was I take care of business, and the universe hands me things I need before I even know I need them. And that had been the story of my life all the way to that point. And the minute I started doing heroin on a regular basis, I knew that deal with the universe was over. And I wasn't wrong. And the more I used, the worse I felt about myself, and the harder it was to get anything done. And then the record deal went away, and I figured out I wasn't going to get sober in LA. Like back then, like 94, nobody I knew was sober. Nobody.
It wasn't trendy in Hollywood yet.
Well, it hadn't even entered into the world yet. And I moved back to Texas thinking that would help. And a lot of my friends in LA just got sober because they didn't have anywhere to go. So a lot of them have a couple more years than me. And when I moved back here, and moving didn't keep me sober, it was like I just didn't care if I lived or died anymore. And I got into a lot of bad stuff, And the last music project I did before I got sober, which was about a little over 2 years before I got sober, it was me and two guys from a band called the Skate Nigs, and a guy from Ministry, and Gibby from the Buttle Surfers, and like all of us were strung out, and we made this sort of punk rock record using samplers and stuff, and it started. The band was called Chore Boy, and
for those of y'all at home, Chore Boy is a very popular Brillo that is used for smoking crack.
The record came out, started selling in Europe. We were too strung out to go, so we got these friends of ours from a punk band in Austin to take Phil Owen. You probably know Phil. To take Phil with them to Europe and pretend they were us and go do the tour and play our songs. And that's what's the last music project I did.
Were you getting paid for it?
Did
he break you off any? No.
No. But and then it was just crime and whatever it took, and people started dying, and like ultimately how I got sober, I spent the last 2 years I was using doing everything I could think of to stop. And I kicked dope more times than I could count. And I couldn't stay stopped. And it was a mystery, but like I literally knew nothing about recovery. It was like I was trying to solve a math equation that had hidden variables. And I was never coming up with an answer. And I was overdosing and dying and being brought back by the paramedics over and over again. And then, I always talk about this day where I find myself sitting at my desk, putting some sights on a pistol for my dad. And my dealer shows up, and I'm sitting at my desk with a rig in one hand and a gun in the other, trying to decide which one to use. And for a minute, it's like I'm watching myself from across the room going, how did those get to be the only choices? They're the only choices, but why?
I get that.
There has to be another answer, and I don't know what it is, but there has to be some other way. I don't know what it is. And then later that day, I'm flipping channels on the TV, and I come across 2020, the news magazine, and they're doing a feature about this guy named Buddy Arnold. And he's a jazz sax player, and he played with all these great people. And then they mentioned that he was a heroin addict for 30 years. And I went, well, that's a weird thing to include. But it turns out the story's not about his music career. It's about the fact that he just formed an organization called the Musicians Assistance Program, funded by the Grammys, whose only job is to send musicians to treatment. And I went, oh, crap. And I ran in the other room and got on my computer, and 3 minutes later, the website loaded because it's 1998 and I'm on AOL. But I got the number, and it took a while of me still trying to manage the whole situation. But they're now Music Cares.
Yeah.
They said,
so you just called them up and you're like, I'm a musician. Please help me.
What do I got to do? You know? And
yeah.
And
Music Cares helped me get into treatment too. So shout out to Music Cares.
And they were like, you know, well, we'll send you some stuff, you know, so you can prove that you're an actual musician, and you know, and then they sent me to a treatment center out here in the Hill Country, and I've been sober ever since. You know?
Where'd you go in the Hill Country?
La Hacienda.
La. All right, right on. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and I went to half a dozen AA meetings during the 2 years before I got sober. I didn't know that different meetings were different. The one I went to, I won't name it, but it's a very social meeting, and they were real fond of just don't use no matter what. Then they'd all piss off and go to dinner and sleep with each other. And nobody ever told me that Austin Recovery existed. Nobody ever told me that there were resources for a guy who was as strung out as I was. You know, the Hand of AA. I reached out for the Hand of AA a bunch of times, and it waved at me and walked off and let me die.
So
you know,
let me ask you about that, because you know the first time I walked into an AA meeting, I showed up and started talking about heroin and coke and all kinds of stuff, and nobody told me anything. Like, they didn't tell me anything during the meeting, but afterwards, a guy kind of pulled me aside and was like, "There's these other meetings that you might feel more comfortable at." So that was not the culture here in Austin. The drunks were not about helping you, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, the place where I was going was a clubhouse, and it wasn't drunks, and they didn't give a crap what drug you talked about. You know, they were just too busy being social and doing whatever.
It wasn't service oriented.
Well, and I don't want to, you know, there was.
I mean, we're not bashing them. No.
There were one or two people who tried to help, but nobody ever told me about Austin Recovery. Nobody ever told me, you know, how are you going to get through the detox? They told me you can do this, it'll be okay. But like, I got a gnarly detox coming, you know, and I don't know what to do about it. And so, you know, that's one of the things I always harp on with people is like, if somebody comes up and talks to you in a meeting and they're desperate and they want help, but you don't have any experience with heroin, surely you know somebody who does. So rather than saying, I don't know what to tell you, you can go, wait, let me go get my buddy. He does. You know, we all have this infinite network of friends who have experiences. And just because I don't know what to do doesn't mean I get to tap out. That's not how that's supposed to work. You know, in Austin, like 85% of the recovery is in AA meetings, and 99% of the people in meetings aren't alcoholics. You know, the closer you get to downtown, the less anybody gives a crap about what your drug of choice was. But you get out in the suburbs, they'll get busy still. Most of those people are dying. You know, they'd be lonely without us. So, you know. But,
so you go out to Laha and what? I mean, I know there's not one moment where you were like, aha, I'm sober now. But I'm sure that there was, you know, there's probably a couple little gems in there where something clicked for you. Like what?
There were several moments. Like my first memory of being there was about a couple of days into the detox, and I'm still loaded up on detox meds and, you know, the whole nine. It's not better yet at all. But I come to, and I can't stay in this bed anymore. So I get up and I wander out into what ends up being my first on-campus 12-step meeting, you know. And I sit down in the meeting and I'm still fuzzy as hell on the meds. And somebody starts talking about God and my head clears up for half a second. I go, oh shit. And then I'm back out. That's my first real memory of being in treatment. And then later that night, laying in the detox unit with uncontrolled leg movements, going, I'm at church camp. What the hell is happening? Because I don't believe in God, and I'm not gonna. And, you know, and there was a desperation around it because a good portion of my life has been spent doing things that nobody else is interested in, and I'm fine with that. But And easily 20 or 30% of my life has been spent watching people who weren't smarter than me and didn't have more resources than me have an easier time than me at things that I just couldn't figure out how to do. And I thought, well, great, this is just going to be another one of those things, you know. And but then one of the staff members, you know, I'm on a charity bed at a $30,000 rehab. Everybody there's got nice skin, you know, 30 grand rehab, you know. But one of the guys that works there, it's an old biker dude, and he helps me understand the first step, you know, and that powerlessness doesn't have anything to do with all the crap you hear in meetings about powerless over everything, which is sounds awesome and humble and is total nonsense. You know,
It doesn't say that in the step, right? It doesn't say that you're powerless. Oh, yeah, I'm with you on that one.
You know, it's if I was powerless over everything, I'd have no ability to take effective action. And people love to say they're powerless over people, places, and things, which is true and irrelevant because so is everyone, whether they're an addict or not. But 9 out of 10 people have complete control over how much they use when they start, and I don't.
Right.
And that's the truth about powerlessness. And it also doesn't mean I can't ever control my using. It means I can't always, 100% of the time, control my using. And I'm like, oh, there it is. So I totally got that.
Yeah.
And the unmanageability didn't have anything to do with the chaos of my life and addiction. The real unmanageability for me is the minute I try to stop, I can't manage the decision.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
It's impossible to be me and not use on my own power. The mental obsession is a part of that unmanageability, you know, and he helped explain that to me in a way that my addled brain could sort of swallow. And then I spent 2 weeks arguing about whether or not God existed because the big book said God either is or he isn't. And I thought we should decide, the church needs to know. But I was terrified.
What'd you come up with?
The bottom of it.
Well, you know, what I came up with was this same guy sat me down and told me his story. And he asked me if I thought we were the same. And I said, yeah. But he was 10 years sober. And then he asked me, do you think I'm just better at not getting high than you? And I said, no, that's not what's happening. He said, why? Because I see you walking around and laughing and joking and being happy, and just not getting high for 10 years could never lead to that. He said, right. Are you willing to believe me when I tell you that I took these seemingly unrelated actions and I don't have to fight that fight, and I haven't in 10 years? And in that moment, I came to believe him. And all the rest, I don't care about the rest. It's my opinion that 12-step recovery has nothing to do with the belief in God and everything to do with firsthand experience with the power of that the steps connect me to. Believe, don't believe.
Thank God for... I was going to say, thank God for the people like that, because I, too, had that experience going to my first meetings when people told me, like, well, you know, you can't talk about that here. This isn't what we're here for. You need to talk about your problem as it pertains to this or pertain to that, but didn't say, like, maybe you should talk to this guy after the meeting. He could help you. It was one of those things where it was like, you know, I'm sitting there shaking, vomit all over me. I don't know where to go, and like I go to this place for help, and nobody seemed to want to help me. So, you know, I just felt like there was no place for me. But thank God for those people who just walk around with this inner peace and are so willing to help the newcomer, whether it's their job or whether it's, you know, at a meeting. Like, those are the people who I always tell, like, anybody just coming in, you find that person who's smiling, who's having a good time, who doesn't care about the bullshit. He's not telling you what to do, how to do it, holding the book up like fire and brimstone. Like, those people who just walk around and just seem like at peace. Thank God for those people, man. That's all I can say.
And I was laughing when you were talking about showing up and having vomit all over you and stuff. And like, I say that nobody really, the hand of AA wasn't reaching out for me, but there's a guy who was in my original home group after I had been in treatment for 30 days, who said that it was a men's meeting. And he said, for at least the first 6 months I was sober in that meeting, away from the meeting, guys from the meeting were having conversations about whether it was safe to let me be in the meeting because they were afraid I was going to snap and hurt someone. And I thought I was doing right. So the hand of AA may just have been a little bit cautious about coming near me because I was, you know, I don't have an or flight. I just have a fight all the time. Even in my desperation, I'm like a cornered animal. So, you know, it may not have been entirely their fault now that I think of it.
Okay. All right.
I was underneath this rough exterior is a teddy bear, but underneath the teddy bear is a sociopath. So, you know, back then it's like, fair enough, whatever. But so I had this moment where I believed this dude, and I started thinking, well, if I do what he does, maybe I can get what he's getting. And that identification is where most of us start with step 2. The rest is too big. It takes too long to actually believe. I was working the steps and living a life in recovery for every day for 10 months. Like I'd wake up and go, wow, I didn't think about getting high yesterday. And I'd do this seemingly unrelated crap all day. Then I'd wake up the next day and go, wow, I didn't think about getting high yesterday. And it took 10 months of doing that every day to finally wake up one day and go, I think if I keep doing this stuff, I'm not going to think about getting high. And at that point I believed, but it took 10 months of experience to get there.
So Chris, I'm curious. So my experience when I got sober, I did not go back home, right? Like, I was using in Laredo. I never went back to Laredo after that. What was your experience until I was sober for like a year or two, and then people just knew I was sober, right? But what was your experience coming back to Austin, with 30 days and running into your old friends and kind of starting to build this new Chris? Like, what was that like?
You also have to understand the landscape in the late 90s. There was no sober living in Austin. There were a few Oxford houses that were mostly being used as transitional housing for people getting out of jail. Mm-hmm. Like Laha wanted to send me to this brand new thing called sober living in Phoenix for 90 days. But like, I'm going like being ever practical and not having a clue what I'm talking about. I'm going like, but I live in Austin. So I need to just go ahead and get started in Austin. So I came home. I actually moved back into the house I had been using in for 3 weeks. And then I moved into a brand new house with a guy I went to rehab with, whose mother thought maybe if he hung out with me, he'd stay sober. That didn't work. But, I lived with this guy for a year, and he was drunk after a week, and he just stayed in his room drinking, and it was what it was. But also for me, like, because of the bands I've been in, and because I grew up here, and because my brothers and sisters grew up here, and they know a lot of people too, so that those people also know me, the shape I was in the last few years, the only people in my life were not people I was ever going to see again. Mm-hmm. They're not good people. And so, like, I'm not going to run into those people by accident. And like, it was humiliating to be in the shape I was in and to go out and have people go, oh, aren't you Chris from the Big Boys? We're both waiting to score, but I feel humiliated by the shape I'm in. I knew it wasn't okay. I just didn't know what to do about it. Like, there was never a point in my heroin use when I thought I was cool Keith Richards. It was bad and wrong and pathetic, but I couldn't function without it. The problem of Chris had just gotten too bad. And so, so when I came back, I wasn't running into anybody I had used with. There was one person, and I was still trying to save her life. When I got sober, my significant other didn't. And I spent the first 2 years, bless her heart, she struggled on and off forever. I think she's doing okay now. I love her to pieces. We don't see each other all that much anymore. Maybe that'll change.
So everybody else that stayed in your life, did you just have this automatic accountability system built in about like, Chris, we all know you, and if you start fucking up, we got you?
There literally wasn't anybody in my life. No one.
It was just nobody.
It was nobody. I was alone, and around a lot of criminals, and a few musician junkie dudes. I heard several years later when a lot of the other people coming off the Red River music scene started sobering up, that like when I went to rehab, there was this buzz for about 2 weeks about what's he doing? Why is he doing? What did Chris go? What's happening? And then they forgot about it, went on with what they were doing. And then 3 years later, they started showing up in meetings, and I was there, and
they're like, this is where you went. Oh, okay.
Right. But when I got out, on my way to treatment, the guy who drove me down there told me about this meeting that I swear he said was at this progressive country guy's house. And I'm not going to that dude's house. I don't know that dude's, but I misheard him, which isn't surprising. And it turns out that a bunch of musicians had just started this men's meeting. It was based on a meeting that's been going on since the 40s at an Italian restaurant in Santa Monica that a couple of the guys had sobered up at. It's never been in the AA directory because back in the 40s, you couldn't have a men's meeting. It had to be inclusive of everyone or you couldn't do it. But this meeting has been going forever at this Italian restaurant in Santa Monica. So when they started this meeting, it just was based on the same format, and it didn't get listed for the first couple of years. And I wandered into it after 7 days of going to meetings and finding old hippies and weird blue collar rednecks and lawyers and like, but where are my people? Where are the tattooed punk rock lunatics? And they were all still using. And but I walked into this meeting and I saw a guy that I've known since I was 18 and he was 20, and our bands used to play together. And I had seen him in LA when he was playing with somebody that was on the same label as me, and he didn't seem like a happy guy. And now he's standing there and he's happy. And I walk into this meeting and go, oh, okay, he's here and I know him, so I can stay here. And over time, I ran into a couple of other guys that I had known from the early 80s who had gotten into the program a couple of years before me, but I hadn't seen them in decades. But that group of men became my home. You know, they were safe. And
so a couple times now you've mentioned, like, I saw this person and that's how I knew that, like, I could get through what I was going through, right? Like, I, you know, like you saw someone else ahead of you who kind of, I guess, gave you some hope, right?
Yeah.
Let's put it real simple. So, I mean, so you've been sober 23 years though. So when was the last time that happened for you, you know?
Yesterday.
Yes.
You know, I've had, I don't know, 13 or 14 sponsors in my sobriety because I think everybody's got something different to teach me, you know, and whatever challenge I'm going through, I want a sponsor who's been through it. Mm-hmm. You know, my first sponsor was sober and happy and playing music. That's what I needed at the time to believe that that was doable again. My second sponsor was really good at the steps, and he was doing something he loved for a living, and he seemed happy. My third sponsor had only ever drank alcohol. He was a suburban alcoholic. But a year before I asked him to be my sponsor, he was sharing in meetings about holding his mother's hand while she died, and my dad had just had a stroke. Mm-hmm. And so I needed somebody who knew how to work the steps and get a higher power involved in that challenge. You know, my current sponsor has become very successful at something that I'm terrified to do, that putting myself out the next as a person further out there and being seen more. And I like working behind the scenes, and, you know, which is weird for a guy who's in rock bands and fairly successful. I still would rather be behind the scenes than putting myself out there, you know, but he's successful at it. And he says he feels like a fraud instead of a subject matter expert and has to do step work on it. So he's my sponsor. You know, I think if you don't have somebody in front of you on the path for whatever challenge life is putting in front of you, then the solution becomes theoretical, and I just blow it off. And I settle for just sober. And I didn't get sober to be sober. I got sober to have a big, cool life. You know, screw sober. That's just the first thing I got to learn how to do. And I didn't get sober to hide out at some AA club. And I'm not knocking people if that's their jam. You know, a lot of people would have just ended up hanging around their church instead of hanging around an AA club, but that's not me.
Yeah. I didn't come this far to just come this far.
Right. I got dragged to people were trying to get me to be more social after I learned to speak in whole sentences and not be quite so terrifying. And I ended up getting dragged to a dance at an AA club at about 7 months sober. And I looked around the room and going, if this is my future, I'm killing myself now.
Oh, man. AA club dance is not knocking them, but, man, that is some awkward party.
It's a room full of people who are never going to get drunk enough to sleep with each other.
Well, I've yet to attend one of those.
I went to an AA conference once, and I got super activated and agitated sexually. And I was having inappropriate thoughts about all these women in the AA club that were at the convention, and I had to step out and go, what is going on? This is pushing some sort of an old button in me. And then I realized that a lot of the women here remind me of a lot of the women backstage and at the after party for the rock shows I used to play. It's like so many women with such poor judgment all in one place. It was like, you know, and that was another thing I had to work on. It's not about, that wasn't about them. They were awesome. But it's like I'm getting activated and pushing some old button for behavior that wasn't a good idea even then. So, you know.
Oh, man.
That's it. It's like, you know, what do you want in your life? And can you find somebody who's done it?
Yeah.
Who can tell you how they did
man. Chris, you know, I'm looking at our production notes of all these really fantastic topics that we were supposed to talk about, you know, creating sober spaces for musicians, advice for effective music, all this good stuff. And I feel like we needed pretty much the whole episode just to scratch the surface of,
we need you to come
the
back.
depth and weight of Chris Gates. So we're gonna have to have you back for a second episode where we can get a little higher
we can
level.
talk about actual stuff instead of like letting me ramble. Yeah, because
Oh man, but it's just so good.
I can be
You know, a lot of
entertaining all night, but but I love talking about stuff that actually affects the larger community as a whole.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, a lot of times with guests, me and Jason have to kind of like find ways to get them to stop talking to move on. But with you, it's like, man, just go. Just go.
Once you mentioned urethane wheels, I was like, he's got the floor.
I know sometimes having a conversation with me is like trying to get a sip of water out of a fire hose.
So we're gonna challenge you right now. We're getting towards the end of the show.
Is it that time?
It's that time.
It's rapid fire question time.
Ooh,
All right, Chris, we
rapid
got a
fire
special-
question time.
Okay.
So here's the thing, though. Jason's going to ask you some questions here, but the challenge is that your answers need to be rapid fire and done.
No problem.
If not, it takes too long and it's not rapid fire anymore, and we don't want to do that. So, Jason.
Nobody likes slow rapid fire questions. Yeah. Okay. All right, Chris, are you ready?
Okay.
How many days sober do you have?
Not a clue.
Not a clue. Okay. What is your favorite new band?
God dang, what is the guy's name? I just discovered this new guy and I can't remember what he's called, so I'm sorry.
Harry Styles.
Okay, we can come back to that if you remember. What was your first show?
The first actual concert I went to was Three Dog Night. I had been sneaking out and going to see bands play when I was 9 and 10 years old down in bars on the drag, pretending my hippie dad was inside. But the first time I bought a ticket was Three Dog Night in like 1973.
All right. First punk show.
First punk show, 2 bands in Austin, a band called The Next and a band called The Mistakes. The Next had a box on the stage saying they're taking donations of drugs and money for their trip to LA, and I went, "Oh, I'm in."
Oh, wow.
They
All
sounded
right,
like
so we're going to go back to the spinning wheel here. What's a song that will always make you cry?
it's a song called "Broken Things" by a woman named Julie Miller. It's mind blowing. You should listen to it.
I'll have to.
It's about offering her heart to God because it's broken. I like to play it, and it makes me cry, and I usually can't even make my way through the song trying to play it. So
it's going on the Spotify playlist.
This one, Chris, is punk dead?
the pat answer is yes, but the funeral is amazing. It's no longer. I don't know that it's growing anymore, but it's still entertaining. Every year, there's a new crop of 13-year-olds who discovers it. So no.
Here's the thing.
All right.
The punk sound might be dead, but what is truly punk? Like, I mean, we were talking about Lil Nas X at the top of the show.
He's punk.
He is punk as fuck.
In 1979 and 1980, he would have been in the punk scene.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if Jerry Lee Lewis were born in 1961, he would have been in the punk scene. So that creative anarchy piece of it, that's definitely still alive. It's just looking for new outlets. It's not playing music anymore.
The spirit lives on.
Yeah.
Well, was that the last one?
So we're no, that was it. That was all the rapid fire questions.
Sweet.
So this is, we're wrapping up here, Chris. Do you have any messages for anybody out there who might still be sick and suffering, or who is loving somebody who is sick and suffering?
There's a way out. That's the whole, if I can do this, anybody can do this, because I'm not special. If you do what I do, you'll get your version of what I'm getting. And if you struggle because you've gone to a few meetings and the way they talk about God smells like church, there are a bunch of videos on my Big Cool Life website. I had to develop a way of thinking about this that leaves all that out. I am not an atheist. That's just another rigid, unsupportable belief system for me. Atheists are the vegans of the spiritual continuum. But But there is a way to think about this that doesn't require any sort of belief at all. It just requires action and experience. And if you want to find out more about that, they're all videos of all the classes I used to teach at AR are on there and some other stuff. And that's what they're up there for, is to help people like me who are off put by the things that feel like religion, but still desperately want to find a better way to be themselves.
Oh, man.
Wow.
Chris, I could listen to you talk all day. I don't think I've smiled and laughed so much on an episode of Toxicology ever. I laughed so hard at one point, like if I had been drinking milk, it would have come out. No.
Start making your own milk. I can make
good times. Good times.
Oh, my God. But we definitely, Greg, make a note. Let's get Chris back in like 2 months.
Yeah, no problem.
Go to another level with this. Jason, you got anything you want to say before we wrap it up, sir?
No, man, that was just I got to just nerd out. It's been my dream to have somebody on to talk about skateboarding and punk rock the whole time we've been doing this. So thank you for being of service.
You know how to find me. Come find me. Let's go get coffee and talk about skateboarding and punk rock.
Oh, hell yeah.
In fact, everybody out there that's watching, you can find me through the website. I'm not hard to find. If you have a question or you want to talk, reach out.
But first.
Anybody listening to this, open invitation. But only coffee and only punk rock and skateboarding. Nothing else.
Or whatever.
Well, Chris, thank you again for making the time to come on our silly little show here. I think definitely there's so much good stuff that you said that we can with 100% certainty say that this has helped and is going to help other people. For all our listeners, make sure you like, follow, subscribe. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms, Anchor, Apple Podcasts. Share it with your friends, please, because we love doing this and we love thinking that there's people we'll never meet who will benefit from this. And as we like to say here on Toxicology, there's 1,000 ways in and there's 1,000 ways out. We hope you find yours.